What is going on, y'all? What is happening, Mo? What's going on? It's your boy, DameSmiff. And this evening, I'm essentially going to be chatting with you guys a little bit about my perspective on, I would say, law and order here and where I live, the United States, essentially. But just kind of give my opinion on certain things and also talk to you guys about some of the things that I've noticed when it comes to how our community culture and especially musicians will have to navigate a lot of the things when it comes to um, crime, criminality, and just law in general. But if you're interested in conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button and also subscribe. And the reason we do that is so that when you hit the like button, more people can see this content, so you can have more people to talk to in the chat and also more people in the comments. And then you hit subscribe so that way you can see my latest videos. Simple as that. But the reason I'm doing this live stream in particular is because I think it will help a lot of younger musicians to kind of understand the options in front of them when it comes to who they hang around, what they're doing with their free time, and what they want to do with their, in general, with their career, right? And so with the topic of law and criminality, right, it's really come down to, at least in my opinion, the understanding of law and things like that. And so I have like a novice understanding of law, so I really know a lot of the laws that pertain to me personally, right? But there's a lot of laws and things from, let's say, from one state to another that you may not know that you will need to know in the future. So I've seen that with like gun laws. They've changed from time to time, at least in my lifetime. I've seen real estate, tax laws, all kinds of things change, business laws, cybersecurity laws are starting to, take shape and form and things like that. So there's a lot of different things that are moving as far as like pieces involved for your understanding of how to keep yourself out of jail or how to, reduce paying fines to your city and the federal government, right? And so understanding this is usually a matter of studying, experience, and also kind of like having examples to learn from as well, because you just don't know what you don't know. Like there's just certain things you just will not know unless someone either puts it in front of you or you have the opportunity to experience the consequence of maybe, you know, experiencing breaking a law or maybe watching someone else do it, like watching a crime show or maybe talking to a police officer or watching a police conference and things like that. So you can learn a lot. And again, this is going to be super helpful for the younger musicians because usually younger musicians, and if you take it off of musicians, our younger community from teens to 20-year-olds, they don't really have the time to sit down and learn about all the laws they could possibly break, but B, they are also the biggest population that makes up the ones that break the laws, and at least in my country. So usually it's young men in their like 20s, like early 20s, maybe mid 20s, late teens and things like that. They're usually the ones that are committing a lot of the crimes. Now some will say it's maybe a matter of parenting or education or culture and things like that. What I've learned, at least in my experience, it's literally a decision. Like for most of the crimes that you will see, it's a decision. Now, sometimes it'll be coercion, or maybe they just do not know better. They're just simply young and dumb. But a majority of the time, we pretty much know what we're doing after a certain point. So when I'm saying I want to lay out different options for younger musicians and things like that, it's really just so that you can understand the choices you're making are actually choices, okay? Because there's a lot of conversation around protecting musicians from record labels, protecting musicians from like cyberbullying and things like that. But in my opinion, there's actually preventative measures that you can take that are actually avoid these issues and sometimes even put you in a way to benefit from some of the things going on in the world. And you can take a darker look at some of these things and maybe take a more, I would say, capitalistic, pragmatic look at it. But I really do want to try to look at this as more of a like, let's try to help people, mindset. I want to really help younger musicians understand that you can live your personal lifestyle and be within the law so that you can continue living your lifestyle, So that's how I wanted to look. But so I wanted to pull up a few examples and we're going to get into my favorite teammate here, Gemini. And so Gemini is actually a really, really cool tool. And if you saw the last episode, we went over reading the big, beautiful bill signed by the Trump administration, and we used AI to help us do it. And the reason we did that was because the broad spectrum that the bill covers is, going to take a lot of time. So we basically used AI to break down the key points. We went over some of the key points, and then in my personal opinion, I just kind of flowed with where the bill took me as far as information that was pertinent to me in front of me. But there's a lot of information in that bill that you can use AI to help you dive into as far as asking questions, finding sources to, learn from and things like that. So it was really fun. But in this episode, we're going to look at what we can search online with a few questions as far as how our younger community slash musicians are affected by crime today. So when we think about like, again, the demographic, we got to really understand how our demographic runs into the same issues over and over again. So let's ask it the question, are the criminals in the age group 20 through 30 in the US often connected to entertainment? And the reason that's like a weird, where'd I go? The reason that's going to be like a weird question is because I'm trying to focus on specifically musicians, but there is kind of a effect of what music does to an audience and things like that. So maybe like attendees of a rock concert, attendees of a hip hop club, you know? So there's a lot of different ways that this same demographic is affected. So what Gemini says here is that while there isn't direct statistical data to definitively say that criminals in the age group 20s and 30s in the US are often connected to entertainment, we can draw some conclusions with available information. So it starts with age and crime trends. Criminal offending generally peaks in the late teens or early 20s and then decreases with age. So that was the first thing I pointed out here, is that criminal offending generally peaks in the late teens. So meaning like, let's say 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, or early 20s, and then decreases with age. So we can take one or two things from that. That can mean that, you know, people get older and realize it's not worth it to commit crime, you know, petty crimes and things like that. Or two, maybe they get a little better because they haven't got caught. But when you see the arrest rates in some of these counties and states and things like that, it's not necessarily the latter. It's more so that people just kind of, you know, it's better to just do the legal lifestyle than spending time in a box, you know. So it continues to say, this means the 20 to 30 age group is indeed a demographic where criminal activity is more prevalent compared to older age groups. So if you have, let's say you're a parent watching this, right? And you have a teen right now and he's 16, 17, 18, 19, statistically speaking, they have a higher chance of participating, being around, or knowing of criminal activity just simply because their peer group is in a high chance of being involved or knowing of or being suspicious of criminal activity. So we recently saw in Philly a cookout shooting, and the video was wild, right? And it's traumatizing. But when you see a lot of these news outlets repeating the footage, right? If you pay attention, they're focusing on obviously the criminality of it. But if you pay attention to the actual setting of the video, they're at a house, you know, armed with weapons, shooting over more teenagers. So it's teenagers shooting at teenagers, and there are teenagers there that are not armed, that are there with maybe just a cell phone, some food, and some cash from their parents. So you'll see a stark difference between how you may raise your kid and the other teenagers that they're around. And then it goes, you know, into their well into their 20s. So they could be in college dealing with the same things. But reading this as a parent, that should make you think about, like, again, the demographic environment you surround your kids with. So continuing on, it says recent data suggests a decline in violent crime arrests among young adults, particularly those born in the early 1990s and later. So that's around my group. I was 92. However, the frequency of offending for those who are arrested has slightly increased. So overall, it's basically saying my generation, there's not as many of us being arrested, but those that get arrested tend to offend a lot more often. So they're basically getting a little more efficient at finding the troublemakers, right? At least when it comes to identifying them. What happens as far as they get in charge and what goes on in court is a whole nother conversation. But this is just to find out who's doing the stuff, right? So let's see how media has an influence on us. And this is, again, just based on Gemini pulling information. We could dig deeper as far as like the sources it's going to provide. But this is just to kind of spark the conversation on how these laws and our choice of criminality affects our youth and also affects our career trajectory when it comes to being a successful musician, right? So it continues to say the media, including entertainment, plays a significant role in shaping perceptions of crime. And before we even go on, I think the first thing my mind goes to is like the conversation around gangster rap when I was younger. Gangster rap a lot of times used to be connected to like pretty much just men in America. People used to assume if you were listening to gangster rap or you were blasting it out of your car, there was some level of criminality or like degeneracy to your lifestyle. And that was one, a stereotype, but B, I mean, but two, a little bit true. And it would be something as subtle as drinking and smoking all the way down to petty crime. So a lot of people really didn't understand the role entertainment played in that stereotype, but it played a big one in the sense that a lot of us, when we were younger, us 90s babies, we really did look at what was considered degeneracy from one group of people as normal in our actual lifestyle. So then Gemini continues to say that sensationalized reporting can create a distorted view of crime prevalence and severity. So this also has on the other side of it sensationalized reporting, meaning like people just reporting crimes that are just, unnecessary, like jaywalking when there could be, a murder to worry about. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't report it. It just means that a bit of it is sensationalized. So this person in my example may not actually be jaywalking. They could be just annoying the person that's making the call. And because of a rise in that, it has created a distorted view of how many people would view a crime. And I'll give you one realistic example. If you've ever seen two people in the street arguing, and then one of the people who gets very, very loud and, passionate about the argument winds up actually shoving the other person. Put in the comments whether or not you think that person just committed a crime. And that's kind of the point that I'm making right here, is that there's sensationalization where some people feel as though they have been assaulted without ever actually being assaulted. And then on the other hand, people who have actually been assaulted also feel that, hey, have not been assaulted and don't treat it as such. So there's a distorted view on what actually is a crime and how the law should be enforced. And it usually comes from how we're raised, our culture, and things like that. In some cultures, it's okay to put your hands on people. In some other cultures, it is never okay to put your hands on people. But the law is the law, and it's the law of the land. So this is pretty much just to kind of lay out the understanding of the options you have with the consequences laid before you. So let's continue on with Gemini. And it says, there's a long standing discussion about the influence of violent entertainment in movies, music, and video games on aggressive behavior, particularly among youth. While not the sole factor, many studies suggest a causal connection between exposure to violent content and increased aggression. So there's always that argument about like how media influences the public's behavior, and we kind of can't really disregard that point. The more we see, let's say, like our latest political content, and then also our latest gender-based content, and then also we can use some of the examples here where they're talking about movies, music, and video games, but it's kind of like a strange phenomenon to see like a certain point, idea, or movie or artistic perspective to come out or be released, and then suddenly a large group of people kind of have their perspective shaped by it, right? It would kind of be foolish to not notice that, or at least point it out, especially amongst the youth, when we do claim that the youth and younger group of people that live with us are highly influenced. So there is a conversation to be had there. But in my opinion, the way I look at this is that there's a bit of mental fortitude that's going to come with being influenced. And I'll use myself as an example. Like when I was younger, I used to hate horror movies. Like horror movies used to trigger me in a way, because it was not necessarily I was like scared or stuff like that. It would just gross me out. Like I didn't like seeing bad things, So it was like in my mind, you would see something like, let's say, Michael Myers, he's chasing somebody, right? And then he finally catches the person and he gets them. In my mind, I'm like, this is bad. I don't want to see this. So it triggered that. But then when you kind of get older and you kind of understand it's film, it's fake, and all that stuff, right? Like that, you look at it for what it is. But when I was older, in hindsight, what I realized is that the reason it was such a triggering feeling was because I was young and I was processing it with a younger mind. So taking that in consideration, I do have to, kind of give this point some validity, because I wouldn't show certain content to certain people, no matter their age. Like there's just certain demographics of people I wouldn't expose certain content to. Like if there was let's say young women that wanted to learn about fitness. I wouldn't show them, a bunch of like brolic, yoked up muscle guys trying to, push a bunch of weight. I would try to balance it to where they can understand and consume the content, in a way. So there is a point to be had here, but let's continue on. It says gang culture is sometimes glamorized in popular media, and some popular musicians and athletes have been associated with street gangs. This can potentially influence young people, though the direct impact on criminal behavior is complex and debated. So, this point is actually one that I've actually got to see in real time when I was younger. So, I went to school in New York and around like Syracuse and stuff like that, right? The thing about this glamorization of gang culture is that it's subtle, right? It's super subtle. Like if you're a parent, you probably don't even know it's in your household, and you probably are involved in cultivating it in your own household. So like things like certain patterns of cloth your kids are wearing, that could definitely be a signal. Um, Lingo, vocabulary, certain terms and things like that. That can be another signal. Styles like outfits, fashion. Some of these outfits that people wear in our neighborhoods and our communities are influenced by people who not usually, but sometimes have a criminal or gang uh, culture. So it can be something like the colors of your shoelaces. It can be something like a certain jacket, maybe the way you wear your pants and things like that. Now, gang culture kind of makes it very specific, but this can be a variety of things because when I was growing up, it was we saw the end of the grunge era. So you can kind of see how like baggy pants and chains and big hoodies played a role in how people perceived you. Didn't necessarily mean you were a part of a gang, but it did mean you fit into a certain stereotype. Now, as we start to move towards, making music and being in entertainment, some of the same things that people use in their lifestyle are used as props by actors and entertainers and musicians and things like that. So you'll see beautiful women wearing paisley print bandanas, and it will influence another young girl who has no idea that that is a certain representation in her community. She's wearing it and walking around her community. Now, the last part of this, where it says this could potentially influence young people, though the direct impact on criminal behavior is complex, is usually where this point kind of gets split into two. Because A, we do believe that you should have the freedom to wear what you want. And then B, there is also the reality that what you wear signifies how people will treat you. So if we take, let's say, baggy pants and a hoodie on a young man, right? Doesn't necessarily mean he's a part of a gang, but it does make him the prime stereotype for A, an officer to judge you, and B, another gang member or another criminal person to kind of feel connected to you, to have a conversation with you, to feel invited to have a conversation with you. And this is usually where the complexity begins, because now you have what I spoke about earlier, where the gang culture is subtle. So now you'll have a conversation where you're talking to somebody like me. I'm wearing a hoodie, right? As a black guy, I'm wearing a hoodie as a black guy. But for you to judge me with, I could be in some kind of criminal activity or some kind of gang degeneracy and things like that would make sense. But it doesn't make sense once you have a group of people doing it that have no clue that they represent something else. So you'll have people wearing baggy pants, hoodies, using the slang, using the culture, the idioms, and things like that. And then when you have an actual one-on-one conversation with them, then you'll realize they heard nothing about the thing that they're saying, which confuses the reality of it, which confuses like why gangs do the things they do, why criminals do the things they do. So it makes it difficult and complex because now we can't identify, what it is that we're trying to represent. And this is only an issue for entertainers and musicians particularly in hip hop, because you're supposed to be representing your individuality, right? So when you see things like it says here some popular musicians and athletes have been associated with street gangs, that's not necessarily the musicians and athletes fault, but it is something that is used when it's time to represent them, right? So when you have people connect to, let's say, like a Snoop Dogg or YG, Schoolboy Q, Nipsey Hussle, and things like that, when they connect these names to these organizations, you're not necessarily connecting the entirety of either the person or the organization, because for the general person, for the average listener, you don't know everything. And if you do, you probably wouldn't associate them together, you know? So to make this simple, I say all this to say, and then we can move on to the next point. There is an association with criminality to some of your favorite people that you may not be aware of. And that makes what they do seem very palpable to you and your family. And so once you're aware of it, you'll kind of be able to filter out what you believe and don't believe. It can go as, far as carrying a gun for your kids, like allowing your kids to carry a gun, to something as little as allowing your kids to cuss or use curse words in the household. So it really depends on how you want to parent. So let's move on to the next point. Celebrity crime. So celebrity crime is a little different than, just gang culture and street culture, right? There are certainly instances of celebrities, some in the 20, 30 age range, being involved in criminal activities. These cases often receive significant media attention due to their public profile. However, these are individual cases and don't necessarily indicate a widespread connection between all criminals in that age group and the entertainment industry itself. So this one is a pretty fair point, and it's basically just saying that, like, when you see like a pop star, she gets a DUI. A lot of people get DUIs. She just happens to be a pop star. When you see like the one, the rich married singer guy get a paparazzi photo coming out of a strip club, a lot of people are married in strip clubs and they just don't get pictures taken of them because they're not famous, right? So all this is really stating is that it doesn't necessarily mean that there is some kind of like stereotype that comes with it. It just means that their crime, even though they would statistically fit in the group that does a lot more crime, seems to be highlighted. So what does that mean for the, let's say, average musician coming up? Well, it means that you would have to kind of be able to filter out whether or not the person you're looking at, let's say you're looking at a young musician go through some crazy, case or maybe some scandal or something like that. You will have to be able to filter out how they got into the situation, and then you have to filter out whether or not this is directed towards their career or just like a personal lifestyle choice. So if we look back at the previous point about gang culture and things like that, gang culture is a personal choice, it's a lifestyle choice. So you wouldn't necessarily hold it against the person because there are some personal decisions they have to make there. But when there's like things like coercion, or maybe you're just literally too young and too ignorant to know what's going on, then you would kind of give them a bit of grace, usually in most cases, right? So I think for a lot of our younger musicians, they're going to have to really have a plan in place when it comes to their career, so they don't really run into a lot of these mistakes as a young musician. But continuing on, they have the conclusion here, and it says it's important to differentiate between influence of entertainment on crime. And it says there's ongoing debate and research regarding how violent or gang related entertainment might influence individuals, especially youth, towards criminal behavior. And then it says individuals in entertainment involved in crime. Some individuals who happen to be in the entertainment industry may commit crimes, just like people in any other profession. We mentioned that as well. And then the direct connection between criminals as a whole demographic and the entertainment industry. There is no evidence to suggest that the majority of criminals in the 20 and 30-year age group are directly employed by or formally connected to the entertainment industry in a professional capacity. by being consumers of it, beyond being consumers of it. So we essentially kind of just broke down how the prime demographic for entertainment is connected to their well, I would say this prime group of people are connected to their understanding of criminality through their influence of entertainment, right? But I do want to see something else here. So let's look up, let's ask Gemini, how many American musicians have been arrested for drug crime, and what are the, oh, I misspelled it, what are the general ages? So I chose drug crime because that's one of the crimes, well, one of the things, not really a crime, but one of the things that gets people arrested that can be easy to miss. Because as I was saying with gang culture, it's subtle. Like pretty much a lot of people will use things, drink alcohol and things like that, but it affects their behavior and their decision making. And so when we consider 20 and 30-year-olds and how they make their decisions, we do have to be very, very aware of that, especially if we do want to be successful musicians. So it says it's impossible to provide an exact number of American musicians, which is not what we're looking for anyway, as there isn't a central publicly accessible database that specifically tracks this information across all genres and time periods. That actually, there's an opportunity there for you data crunchers right there. So if you see this, there's actually an opportunity right there for you. Continuing on, it says arrest records are typically maintained by local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, and aggregating this data specifically for musicians would be an immense and ongoing task. However, we can draw some general conclusions and observations. Prevalence in the drug use in the music industry. So if you have a young musician in your family, or if you have somebody who wants to get into the music industry, we do have to understand these things, right? The key thing is that some people do go into this with addictions. Some people come out of this with addictions, and some people get over addictions through music. We've seen Jelly Roll. We've seen, so many different people from Mac Miller to Juice World. Drugs has affected so many different musicians in so many different ways that it's, again, wise to understand how these things have affected so many musicians, especially if you are a sober musician trying to get into it. So it's important to understand this. And then we're going to try to get into how some of these laws work when it comes to the lifestyles of these typical musicians. But we'll know how to ask the next questions as we continue to read this. So it says the prevalence of drug use in the music industry, higher risk. Okay. Studies and anecdotal evidence strongly suggest that musicians and artists in general are at a higher risk for substance abuse and addiction compared to the general population. Factors include lifestyle like touring, irregular hours, high stress environments, and exposure to party culture. So if we stop here, this one is kind of like the previous point I made about gang culture. It's a choice. It's literally a choice. This is not nothing that you can't get a grasp of and you can't understand. And I can kind of break down how to solve these issues really quickly. So touring in one way, usually brings a higher risk for drug use and substance abuse for musicians because there is more opportunity. I'm gonna just be honest with you. Like, you're gonna be going from city to city, and probably if you're a solo musician, you're at a higher risk, like even more danger. But if you're on like a tour bus with people and things like that, you have, like I said, opportunities. And you'll hear from some of your favorite musicians like Wiz Khalifa and Snoop Dogg say people just kind of offer them things. And it's not necessarily the safest thing, even though it is nice, but it is a reality. So let's say everything goes right. Like, you just have a really cool fan base and they just love giving you things for free, right? That could easily lead you into a kind of sense of like a mindset that you have abundance, right? You're not necessarily paying for it. You're not necessarily working for it. You are, but you're not necessarily working for these substances, right? So you could wind up overusing, and that's where you will start to develop an addiction or maybe a dependency on it, right? And I've seen it to where musicians don't necessarily start with a dependency, but they have like an openness. They're ready to try things, whether it's pills or syrup and things like that. And because the fan base reacts popular or positively to their use and how it looks in their lifestyle, it kind of becomes a part of their job. And I'll give you a positive version of that. So like when you look at NLE Chopper, when he started doing Chopper, when he started doing fitness content or just, fitness related points in his career, when people reacted positively to it, you started to see more of the fitness related content. So it's not necessarily just drugs. It's about more so the influenceability of these choices and how it affects younger musicians and things like that. Now, if you're an older musician and you're an alcoholic, it's gonna be very hard to influence you to not be an alcoholic without the help of some like serious professional work. But usually these are things that can easily trigger younger musicians. Like you'll see young pop singers, they'll get on pills and things like that. And it doesn't have to be nefarious or illegal. They can be doing this to kind of cope with the lifestyle of having to be a high functioning touring artist who had to go from maybe just being a musician at home 1 month or 1 year to suddenly having to be a very high efficient person. So there is that reality to it as well. Addiction is not so, one sided. The next thing here is irregular hours. Irregular hours is an easy one to fix, a hard one to maintain. So irregular hours just simply means like if you're not touring and you're working in the studios and in your city, there isn't really a plan on how your hours are set from the day to day. And if you were watching these live streams recently, we saw how Tech Nine has built his estate for Strange Land, Strange World, Strange Universe, and things like that. And one of the things that was asked of him was like, "Hey, are you a night owl? Do you stay up all night and be in the studio writing music?" And he emphatically said no. He pretty much not wakes up, but he starts his day, he said, around like 9 or 10 a.m. and he treats it like a job. So pretty much from 9 to probably like 6 in the afternoon, he's pretty much at work. But work are the regular hours. And that's how you fix this issue for, your lifestyle. Because if you have regular hours, you'll wind up doing what happened here in the touring part, where you have to take drugs to kind of stimulate your feelings and things like that, from caffeine to focus to mental capacity, even like sleeping drugs and things like that. And then you'll develop a dependency if you can't get some kind of grasp, on your hours. The next thing is high stress environments. So if you're a musician that's in a certain genre, it can be very, very difficult to bring low stress environments. And we can use gangster rap as an option, whereas there's a lot of if you can hear it in their lyrics, they don't trust nobody. Everybody's not their friend. They got guns and there's drugs and they're paranoid and things like that. And they want to be popular in the rap industry, but they're, scared to do legal business because they don't want to get ripped off by a guy in a suit. So it's just high stress all the time, right? The girl's cheating on him, but her butt's big, so he misses her. It's a lot going on in his life, right? So I'm gonna give you the solution here. The solution here is you need to kind of, just like irregular hours, you need to schedule in time to actually be low stress. As a gangster rapper, you might need some spa days. You might need to go on vacation. You might need to, go vegan, take a cleanse and things like that, do some stretching and things like that. So that way you can be the best MC rapper you can be. And that goes the same with any other genre. If you're a orchestral violinist, then you would still need some of the same things a human would need to lower their stress level so that way you can perform. It goes hand in hand. And then the next thing it says, and exposure to party culture. Party culture is probably going to be the hardest thing to manage because there's a social aspect to it. Some people feel offended that you don't eat the food they offer. Some people feel offended that you're not a drinker or like, just a social drinker. So you do have to kind of like play the game, but there's ways you can do it. Let's say if you're at a social event and you want to, you don't want to stand out with drinks and alcoholic drinks and things like that, you can get non-alcoholic versions of some of the best drinks out there. The key thing is you want to know what places you're going to be at, so that way you can make this decision. If you're going to a dive bar, Denise probably doesn't know how to make, a non-alcoholic martini. She probably didn't go to school for bartending in the first place. So you very much want to be in control of that. But this is why I said this first category here is all choice. It's all decision making. You have to be on top of this. Now, you can hire a manager for your touring, but they got to figure out their own life. You can get an assistant to book your hours, but you got to pay top dollar. You can, again, try to figure out and spend the highest amount of money for low stress environments, but you better have the budget for it. And then you can also try and avoid party culture, but you better have the network for it. If you don't, then you're going to have to get a grip on all of this, like literally. So let's move on to the next bullet point, and it says creative pressure. And this is, again, the prevalence of drug use in the music industry and how it affects musicians. So it says some artists may use drugs as a coping mechanism or in the mistaken belief that it enhances creativity. This is what I never really understood, like using drugs as a coping mechanism, because I guess I just never had to do that. Like there's people who suffer from PTSD and things like that. And there's people who kind of do have like physical ailments that the chemicals and drugs really do fix. So I never had to deal with that. But on a music related note, I never really understand the whole drugs enhance creativity. I think drugs just kind of change creativity. It doesn't really enhance. Enhance, in my opinion, means that you would get a better grasp on things that are understood. You would get a improved performance, right? But I think what truly happens is that because these are chemicals affecting your brain synapses, I think they just kind of change how your brain thinks of these structures we've developed in music theory. So when you have something like chordal changes and tonal changes on like a guitar player, it may sound different when he's high because he's thinking differently, right? But enhance would means that it would be, you know, better note, better note placement, better note intonation, better timing and things like that. And that's not necessarily the case. So I think, in my opinion, I think for drugs, you would kind of just get different effects depending on how this person's mood, mindset, and things like that are set up, but not necessarily enhanced. That's the only thing I would say is I would be against on that part. So then when we move on to peer pressure, it says being in an environment where substance use is normalized or even glorified. And yes, this goes perfectly with the hip hop example I gave earlier. If you're in the studio and let's say you're a young female rapper and you want to be in the studio and you got your rhyme book or you written on your notepad, right, in your iPad, and you got your rhymes in there and your producer sits you down and the engineer, and then they're like, yeah, I got some other artists are going to come in because, it's a working studio. And the other artists come in and they pull out their backpacks and they start pulling out laptops, hard drives and things like that. And then one of the artist's girlfriends comes in and she sits down. She's like, hey, I'm Denise. I'm real nice and stuff like that. She opens her purse and she just puts plastic bags of just drugs, rolling trays, and then liquor bottles and things like that on the table. This is a prime opportunity for you to make a decision. And going back to our previous point, one of the decisions would be to say no to all of this and possibly alienate yourself from this network, or you could say no to all of this and kind of gain the respect depending on how you play this, position you're in. But for many, 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 many people, especially the younger musicians, they will fall victim to peer pressure. They will easily be offered anything on this table and they'll say yes to it just for the simple chance, just to say, hey, I might not be the one addicted to it. Hey, this may not be the life-changing, life-altering moment for me right here. This may not be it. So it's very, very easy for a lot of people to step into that. And I have to stress that because yeah, you kind of got to take a reality check and realize that whatever year you were born, a lot of people didn't make it to this point today. So, and it's not necessarily just, something attack them. It's probably just a decision, a simple decision to say, yes, I'm going to try the drugs this girl is offering me, or yes, I'm going to go out with this guy, or yes, I'm going to take this contract, or whatever it is. It was just a simple decision. So I think once you kind of understand that as a young musician, it's very easy to make these decisions as you become an older musician. So let's move on to the next point, and it says genetic predisposition. So some theories suggest a genetic link to addiction that might be more prevalent in creative individuals. So I have no facts to this, but in my opinion, there is something to where like creative people tend to have more issues with them, and it I think goes back to just being able to think differently. Like for some creative people, I've noticed they can only be creative in one way or maybe one or two ways. For other creative people, the creativity lies more so in the glue of creativity, like being able to learn, being able to adapt and things like that. They're not necessarily, a good painter or a good singer, but they can easily pick up on painting and singing, right? So there may be some genetic predisposition when it comes to specifically addiction, just as well as there could be a genetic predisposition to being very, very good or smart at something. So that's a great point as well. And I'm not really too sure how to really rebut that other than to look more into it. But let's continue on with the historical context. And it says drug use has been intertwined with various music genres like jazz, rock, hip hop, and electronic dance music for decades, leading to a cultural acceptance of use in some circles. And this was the point I was making earlier about being in the studio and then people just start pulling out drugs, right? In all of these situations, this can happen. In all of these genres, I mean, this could happen. So you could be in a studio for jazz rehearsal and somebody could ask you to, hit a bump of coke, or they could ask you if you want to hit some weed. And because you're used to jazz musicians being known for that, you might say yes, just to fit in. Same with rock. You could be backstage and somebody pulls out a crack pipe, and somebody pulls out a line of coke. Somebody pulls out a 40 ounce of alcohol, and you're about to go on stage in about 4 or 5 minutes. So you got to make a decision. Same with hip hop. People could start pouring up lean an hour before the show. They're sitting outside of the studio or the venue and they're starting rolling up weed. You got to make a choice. And the last, of course, electronic dance music. Pills. Pills is a big one. You could be hanging out with a group of girls and then they just start offering you pills. What are you going to do? There's a different level of peer pressure for each of these situations depending on who you are and your mental fortitude. But going back to us being young musicians, it's easy. There's a lot of people that we don't know their names. They too made music and had a great career ahead of them. We will never hear their songs. We don't know how ill of a rapper they'll ever be. A lot of people have fallen victim to just the choice, the simple decision to say yes to someone being nice to them, or someone actually preying upon their success or preying upon their vulnerability and things like that. So again, I'm laying this out in front of you so you can just be aware. So you can be like, hey, this girl just tried to offer me, alcohol and pills and weed at the same time within an hour. Why would she do that? What is that going to do to me? You can actually think about that now that you're aware, right? And this is just to prove that the influence ability of younger musicians is very, 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 very easy to manipulate. And if you're an older musician and this is something for you, then again, this is probably something you would want to get professional help with, because you're supposed to, at that point in your life, have kind of your scruples about you. You're supposed to have your principles and things like that laid before you. And if you don't have them, then we got to get you some, which is why you need professional help in that sense. But for younger musicians, this is a easy thing to avoid, and a very, very prominent thing that people fail. A lot of people fail these. So let's continue. It says media coverage. When a prominent musician is arrested for drug offenses, it often becomes a high profile news story. Shout out Diddy. Creating a perception of widespread involvement. even if the actual percentage is still relatively small compared to the total number of musicians. So, similar to how we saw jazz, rock, hip hop, and electronic dance music, nowadays I would say it's not as many people on drugs because the information is out now. If you want to be high and on drugs, you don't necessarily need to be a successful musician to do that anymore. You can just, be Joe down the street working 9 to 5 and you can get your rocks off. So if you really do want to be successful, for the most part, people kind of understand the role these drugs are going to play. Like they know it's going to either ruin things or make it difficult in general, right? So they do make a very great point that when someone does get involved in a DUI or some crazy scandal and things like that, it would kind of make sense to assume that pretty much everybody around them are doing it as well. But that may not be true. They could very much just be a regular, single out addict or crazy weirdo. So now it's going to say, now we're going to get into the arrest. So the reason we're going to get into the arrest is because we want to get into how the law is going to really affect the consequences, right? The consequences are one thing to worry about, but the only reason these consequences exist is because there's a law that you broke. So once we get into that kind of concept, it'll be easy for younger musicians to kind of navigate this, especially if you just want to make music. So general ages of musicians arrested for drug crimes, and this is going to be key because I'm trying to really draw a point here to see if the younger musicians are the most affected and if we can help them out. So it says, while specific age demographics for arrested musicians are not readily available, we can infer some general trends. So it says, overall crime demographics. Drug related arrests, like other types of crime, tend to be higher among young adults. So we still get that same overall point still getting across. Younger adults, so we'll just start at 18, because legally in America, you're an adult at 18, tend to be the ones that are higher in committing drug related crimes. And this is just drug related, so we can get into guns and all that other stuff as well. But specifically, we're talking about drugs right now, but we still see the overarching point that it is younger adults, men and women, right? Music career trajectories. It continues to say that many musicians achieve prominence and are actively touring and recording in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. This is also a period where the pressures and lifestyle factors mentioned above can be most impactful. So, if you've ever seen, I like to use Conway the Machine as an example of a successful musician because there was a lot of extremes in his story that you kind of learn that you realize, similar to what I was saying before, were choices. And once he started to just literally make different choices based on, his story being told, you can see how they created better and better consequences for him. So when they say the prominence of musicians in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that are actually recording and touring, it creates more pressure because these are the prime demographic of clients for people trying to sell and get people to participate in crime. So like if I was a criminal organization, you want a prime working adult with some income. There you go. And then if I was a dealer, you want to get a prime working adult with some income. There you go. So it's not necessarily people targeting you specifically for your age. There's a little bit more to that. It's a little bit layered. But the music career trajectory portion of it is not necessarily one that's talked about because, as I've said before in the I think it was the 3 million fentanyl pills being removed off the street video that I made, the drug dealer that gave Mac Miller his fentanyl overdose dosage, he had kind of no real remorse about the impact he was having with what he was doing. He got arrested for the one case, but we weren't really sure, and we probably will never know how impactful his activity was. But the overarching point that I'm making here is that he doesn't have to be as aware or as empathetic about his impact. And that's where the target of usually musicians gets widened because now you can see somebody who's young, influenceable, and has other people to influence to help sell your product, or even, or maybe influence the lifestyle you're trying to promote. So if it's gang culture, street culture, just basic degeneracy, they have pretty much the prime real estate to get the job done. So moving on, it says the 27 Club, and this is kind of dark. I've heard about the 27 Club. It says this well known phenomenon refers to a number of influential musicians who died at the age of 27, often due to drug or alcohol overdose. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Amy Winehouse, and Kurt Cobain. While this highlights overdose deaths, it underscores the issue of substance abuse among musicians in their young adult years. And a lot of these musicians, they had pretty crazy lifestyles, which kind of exacerbated the issues they were going through. And we talked about them earlier up here, where we said touring, irregular hours, high stress environments, and exposed to party culture. There's also a lot of the societal judgment that comes with the activities that they're doing. So some of these people were trying to keep these lifestyle choices secret, which we saw in the Diddy case, Puff Daddy, and things like that. A lot of the drug use and criminal behavior and things like that, they were trying to keep it down low, make sure nobody found out. But not in the sense of to protect the one guy, but to protect everybody. So to make sure everybody's pretty much good, and that creates more stress. Creates more volatility in your relationships, because you're not really bound by anything. You're bound by a possible mistake, or maybe loose lips sink ships type of situation. But when it comes to the overdose bit, I think again it goes back to choices. These people probably didn't have the awareness of the options that they have in order to relieve stress, to actually not need or depend on substances and things like that. And it was probably easier because, again, if you're a famous musician, people are probably just offering this stuff to you, just making it super easy to get your hands on. And so it gives some examples, and it says looking at lists of famous musicians arrested for drug crimes, you'll find individuals ranging from their late teens to early 20s. Again, the more consistent point. IG, Mac Miller, and Juice WRLD, we mentioned them earlier, to much older musicians who may have struggled with addiction for decades, like Ozzy Osbourne, DMX, and Prince. I actually did know Prince suffered from addiction. We'll actually have to dive into that a little bit. And in summary, it says it's impossible to give an exact number of American musicians arrested for drug crimes, which is not our point right now. But it says there's a significant anecdotal statistical basis to suggest that musicians face a higher risk of drug abuse and subsequent arrests compared to the general population due to lifestyle and industry pressures. Arrests for drug crimes among musicians span a wide age range, but a notable portion occur in their 20s and 30s, which aligns with peak career activity. And that's the key point here. And general age trends for drug related offenses. However, it's a problem that can affect musicians at any age. So, this is kind of my key point here. Notable portion occur in their 20s and 30s, which align with peak career activity. Meaning, if you're a young musician and you're trying to be the illest rapper, you're trying to be the coolest trumpet player or the sexiest singer, if you're in your early 20s and you're starting your career, maybe you're in school for it, or if you're in your 30s and you're starting career and you're trying to get your feet on the ground, this is the prime opportunity for you to lose everything. Meaning you can lose everything by a simple decision, by you simply saying yes to the girl who brings out some weed in the studio, or to the guy who pours a little bit of lean in his Sprite before he spits his verse, or the guy who decides to go speeding down the highway instead of just following the speed limit. The guy who's driving dirty instead of, getting a legal weapon and a concealed carry license. So It's very, very, very easy for you to lose it all. And we just went through these few examples and we used a little bit of Gemini to get it through. But we will explore a little bit more of this. There's other versions of this that we can explore, different versions of crimes. We can explore how different counties view different crimes and things like that, and how the laws will put you in different situations depending on how you approach a lot of these decisions. So that was a late night at Dames. I just wanted to kind of tap in with you guys and make sure y'all are feeling good and give our young musicians a fighting chance out here, man. So y'all understand what's going on out here. Your boy out here is doing well. I'm doing well. So make sure you're doing good. Let me know in the comments how you're doing as well. And if you guys want to see more of this, hit that like button, because the like button tells me that you do want to see more. And I will see you guys tomorrow night.